Welcome to Roots to Results. This is a podcast where we dive deep into personal stories and folks' origins of leadership and how they got where they're going. I'm your host, Danielle DeRuiter-Williams. And in each episode, we're going to explore how folks' early life experiences, whether they be childhood or their family dynamics, have shaped the way that they show up in their work and in the world more broadly. From overcoming challenges like perfectionism and codependency to embracing emotional intelligence and resilience, we're here to uncover the often untold stories that influence leadership strengths, our growth areas, and everything in between. Whether you're a leader yourself or just curious about what makes a great leader tick, you're in the right place. Let's get started. I'm so excited for today's conversation. With us, I have Clair Minson, who is the founder and principal consultant of Sandra Grace. She is a nonprofit leader, a racial equity consultant, a theologian, and all-around badass person who leverages her decades-plus experience in workforce development and mental health counseling to maximize the impact of forward-thinking institutions across the United States. I'm so excited to talk with Clair today because we have an opportunity to explore the ways in which her anchoring herself in her faith and in the capacity for humans to change can really drive forward systemic and institutional change, particularly the opportunity to dismantle racism across a variety of different systems. Clair works with clients in public and private sectors to develop and implement sound strategies that address the root causes of social inequity. I'm going to welcome you, Clair, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you. You want to say just a couple things to folks, introduce yourself, and share a little bit about what Sandra Grace does in the world before we get into the meat of our conversation?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and to be with you, of course, one of my favorite people in the world. Sandra Grace really was founded with the belief that the talent and workforce development systems really are positioned uniquely and strategically to disrupt systems of economic and social inequity. And so we work at that intersection, working with organizations and people and leaders to really ground them in racial equity principles and practices and move them towards equitable and just ways of being and moving through the world.
That elevator pitch, 10 out of 10, no notes. I'm so grateful to have you again. And like the workforce development field is such an important lever that we have towards driving systemic change. And first of all, thank you for all the work that you do to advance these causes. We all appreciate the ways in which you're shaping and changing the world. My first question for you is I want you to tell me a little bit about little Clair. What was little Clair like? What was Clair like as a child?
Ooh, this might bring out some tears today.
I got Shanice on it too.
I was unprepared for little Claire. That framing just struck me, but I appreciate it. Little Claire was joyful and loves to laugh and full of life, like both of my kids actually. Curious, learning, alone, but had deep and meaningful friendships and experiences. I grew up in the Bahamas, and that is such a core part of little and big Claire, very much part of who I am and what shapes me and how I think about and move through the world. Yeah. Woo. I like that.
I know. I myself have been doing a lot of inner child work, and so I'll probably record like a solo episode at one point talking about little Danny and what has brought me to this work. So thank you for indulging that question that was not on the list. I would love to hear a little bit more about your upbringing, your experiences growing up in Bahamas and how that shaped you. We'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, share a little bit more about your family dynamic. What was your house like? What was your family like?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually, as I watch my girls grow up. But I grew up in the home with my mom. My parents they separated by the time I was 2. And I have older siblings on both sides. So I grew up in the house with my oldest brother, my mom's son, and my older sister, one who is still in the Bahamas, and my sister who lives in Washington, D.C. And then my dad's side of the family, I was the only girl for 27 years, a very long time. So 2 older brothers. And then I came along, and then I have a younger brother and a younger sister, a much younger sister. Many of whom still live in the Bahamas, but family members are also around the globe. And so we went to church a lot. That was a huge part. We had Bible studies in our home. Like that was a part of our core community. So a lot of my childhood friendships stem from not only church, but also school. So think of small rural community, island life, right? Everybody
Mhm.
knows you, everybody knows your family, just deeply connected to people and community in ways that I'm like really uncovering now and finding the value in and appreciation of. And then there were all these like cultural moments and experiences from our independence celebration in July to our Christmas, like everything Christmas and just the decorations and our kind of emancipation celebration, Jonathan knew that we have every Christmas night and New Year's Eve into New Year's Day. So just like family, food, culture, people is how I would
Yeah.
describe, and faith,
Yeah. Yeah.
describe upbringing and household and childhood.
I love that, and it's interesting to even think about that interdependence of island life and just being in a smaller community and how many of us miss out on that because of the way that, the US is shaped where it's very suburban. You may or may not know your neighbors depending on the community that you're in and what are those experiences like and how they have shaped our understanding of the community that we are a part of and come from, but also you shared how you have daughters, also the kind of community that we want to shape for our children and for ourselves as we grow up and get older. So that's such a unique experience to have growing up. I'm curious, in thinking back again to those early experiences, the caregivers in your life, the folks who are around you, what were some of the characteristics that they embodied that you really looked up to and you can see yourself practicing now in your own leadership, in work and in family and other realms?
I was not prepared to cry today but we might go there with this question. My grandmother was my person, is my person, and she was a little bit sassy, a little bit quiet, a little bit resolved, a little bit clear, but just didn't have the freedom to really live, I think, the kind of life she wanted to live and desired to live. She was restricted to the cultural and social context and norms of what it meant to be a woman and a Black woman. In the Caribbean, in a patriarchal context. But she like just held space for me to be me. I went there after school every day. And by the time as I was born and came along, my mom's kids are much older. And so my mom was very much involved in her career, and that has shaped my work ethic. But it meant that I spent a lot of time with my grandmother or with my older brother babysitting because she was fulfilling her career goals and dreams. Again, somewhat restricted, but within the context that she knew how, right? She found a path. And my dad is a entrepreneur, and so my relationship with him didn't really solidify until I was a teenager, but I knew that he had a business and was able to work in the office and kind of see how business unfolded, and that I think has shaped me as an entrepreneur now. And I have an aunt who's also my grandmother and godmother, not grandmother, whose care and love and selflessness and faithfulness and loyalty to family and community, while also trying to find ways to live her dream within the confines, right? Those, I think, four people have really shaped and molded me in a lot of different ways that are conscious and somewhat unconscious, like somewhat still discovering in a lot of ways for me.
It's interesting because we've had many conversations, but I did not know that your dad was an entrepreneur. And that's also something I really resonate with because both my parents own their own businesses as well. And now as an entrepreneur, like that has certainly shaped my consideration. That's a career pathway, right? It's very different than if you have your dad goes to a factory and works there their entire life, and your mom is like a teacher and works there their entire life. Like it opens up a whole world of possibility to like self-determine what your life looks like. And I also think about the ways that I've witnessed you go against convention. I'm thinking about what you shared about your grandma. Go against convention and really make choices where it be where you're living or what you're doing that are shaking off. I may have kids, but I don't have to make X, Y, and Z choice. I wonder if that resonates with you at all. I'm just making those connections, and it's just such a beautiful thing to witness, I would say.
It does, and I think in some ways, some of that comes from my mom. It was very unspoken in my experience of her. I think my siblings have a different experience of her, but it was somewhat unspoken. And as I get older, I'm like revisiting my experiences and where I saw her demonstrate the thing that you're naming, right? Just because I'm in this role doesn't mean I'm limited to this way of being. And one
Mhm.
clear example was just the way that she prioritized friendships and she prioritized what she needed for herself. I remember very clearly being 13 and she wanted to travel for her birthday, and I was upset. Kids are terrible sometimes. I was upset, right? As if it was an affront to me. But as an almost 40-year-old woman, I'm like, I totally respect and I'm very glad. That was the last birthday she ever had. And so I'm so glad that she chose herself. And so I think in many ways that is so core to my upbringing and my DNA as she did and as my grandmother, her mom did in many ways in her own life. And I think my great grandmother as well. This is a generational trait and way of living. And I think understanding what we can and cannot do or what restrictions we choose to live by or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also really speaks to the unspoken part, like, you can tell your kids what you want for them or what you hope for them all day, but they're watching you and they're witnessing how you move through the world, and those are maybe what lands with us or roots itself in us even more so than what is said, especially if maybe there's distance between those 2 things, intentional or unintentional, right? "Do better than me." Can be like the voice, right? But the behavior can be something different or vice versa, right? Is I doing the thing, but I'm not talking about it to you. I'm just existing in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I was really I consider myself a bystander in my mom's life. I wasn't necessarily actively involved in her life. I just watched it unfold, which definitely shapes in some ways I repeat the same thing. In some ways I'm trying to resist that as I raise my own girls and think about that, how impactful just watching her life was for me.
Yeah. Yeah. They're sponges for sure. I know that you lost your mom at a relatively early age, and we've talked before about how that sort of has shaped her trajectory. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit with the audience about that experience.
Yeah, I was let's see, my mom had just turned 55, like, so she was about 2.5 weeks out from her birthday and about 2.5 weeks before my 14th birthday, and it was a Saturday morning, and I found her on the ground, and it wasn't abnormal. I didn't think I would share all of that, so I apologize. I didn't give a disclaimer if that it's hard for anybody listening, but I just thought she was praying. Like that wasn't an abnormal thing to lay prostrate and pray. And so I went about my 13-year-old cartoon Saturday morning cartoon business. And hour or so later, God's sister called and I tried to give her the phone and she was just not coherent in her speech. And ultimately, we ended up going to the hospital. She had a stroke and a week later passed away. And so it was, I don't even know how to describe. It was just like a whirlwind, right? Not real. Like life changes in an instant, as we know. And as the youngest of three siblings, I had the least amount of time with my mom. And I think, yeah, I'm still like processing what that experience has meant and how it shaped me. I think in many ways, it matured me because I ended up moving from the Bahamas to America to live with my sister and finish high school. And so changing culture, changing context matured me, although I think there was a layer of maturity, just personality-wise was there. This accelerated. And I think this sense of extreme independence or hyper independence continued, maybe took root in ways that perhaps it wouldn't have. I don't know for sure. That have been both positive and not healthy at times as I've grown and navigated the world and life. It is a very defining moment for me in a lot of ways, personally and professionally. And I'm learning still how to continue to make space for the reality, right? Even in its unfairness.
Mm. Yeah. The analogy around grief of if it's like a ball in a box and there's a grief button on the wall. And when something first happens, the ball is like really large. And then over time it still shrinks, but it can still roll and hit that soft spot. And it will for the rest of our lives. I've lost folks too. And it's definitely something that changes and evolves over time, and also making meaning of it is what we are left to do in the wait, can also be a gift of those insights that we can then employ in our own lives. So there's this sort of bittersweet, who would I be without this happening?
Yeah.
Where would you be like it you're in the US? You came to the US at 14. It's a whole different trajectory potentially to where your life would have led you. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure it's still, like you said, like it's still processing, it's still tough. I'm curious, I'd love to hear more about you as a leader. If you could describe your leadership style or your approach in a few words, and maybe tie some of those threads from what you shared about your early childhood to the leader that you are today.
That's such a good question. I think lead by example is how I would one line it. I do not believe in asking people to do things that I'm unwilling to do myself. I just don't think that's right because I value my time and I value other people's time. And I want people to trust me and I want people to know and trust that I have their best interests at heart. And I think the best way to do that is to show that, to demonstrate it, to model it. I have not done, I think, enough examination of how my childhood experiences have shaped my leadership. So I'd have to spend more time thinking about that. But I do think what I know, what I'm most conscious of now is just that's how I've seen my dad show up in his business. I watched him lead by example. I heard people tell me stories of how my mother was to them and how she made them feel. And so I think that has permeated me and how I engage with people and how I want them to feel as a result of their interaction with me, whether I'm expressly leading them as a team or I'm working in partnership with them side by side, so
Mhm.
to speak. And so I think those both watching and hearing has informed how then I choose to show up. And I want people who are ride or die. And so I think there's just a certain way that you have to be with people in order to have that kind of response and commitment. Dare I say loyalty, but I don't mean that in the toxic way.
Yeah.
Faithfulness, because I'm churchy, is the only thing that comes to mind when I think about that.
It's interesting. I talked a little bit about in other episodes about some of the challenges that I've seen show up in my leadership around perfectionism or being codependent, and seeing how those dynamics of not speaking up for my needs have lended to me being burned out or resentful of a specific situation. But there's also something in there, and I think maybe this might resonate taking from your dad being a business owner. There's a level of audacity and bravery that I think I certainly witnessed with my mom in particular, in terms of taking risks and leaving a government job where she would have had a pension and had all of these things to build this business, and then didn't work out how she wanted it to. But then eventually things picked up because of the foundation that she created. I was then able to be more risk taking and more brave. And that audacity also helps me when I'm in conversation with executives who are 20 years older than me. Getting them to believe what I have to say is something that they should listen to. And so I'm wondering if the audacity and bravery of just entrepreneurship and being able to command space is something that you see in yourself, or something that you may have taken from those experiences as well. It might not just be from your dad, it might be from other folks in your life too.
Yeah, I don't see myself as brave. That is not a word I would use to
What?
describe myself, but people often describe me as that. I think
Yeah.
usually because I'm like, do it afraid, right? Like, I'm totally like, I believe in this thing. I have deep conviction about a thing. And so I think I'm driven by the conviction to do a thing. I'm not driven by like bravery per se, driven to do the thing because I believe in it or it's where I want to be. And so I just leap. And I think I can leap because of the groundedness in my faith that has been a
Mhm.
gift from my mom and grandmom and just community and culture. But I ought to start absorbing that I am brave, especially I can see it in the way that it's played out throughout my life and the places I've moved to and the risks I've taken without any surety, quite honestly, in a country that's not mine. It's not
Yeah.
mine to
Yeah.
call in
Mhm.
particular. And I think I'm going to sit some more with that language around bravery. I know that I live that out. I just
Yeah.
don't always feel it as true for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love to hear more about how your faith plays out, because the anecdote that I just shared around my mom, that foundation that she created, that was the faith that I was anchoring myself in. That if I went to grad school and couldn't afford my apartment, which I did, I moved across the country to LA, and I was able to lean on her throughout that experience of being in grad school. I had backup to be able to then push forward on something that otherwise would not have been possible for me. I would have had to work full time the whole time and whatever the case might be. And so I would love to hear more about how your faith has created that sort of something to anchor yourself in.
I think I shared earlier at the top of the call that I grew up in church, and at the time that I came along in my mom's life, that was where she was. So again, more of her experience and informing and shaping who I am today. And so we had Bible studies in our home, and our church life was amazing, and it was a really good experience. But I think in many ways I watched her live that faith. I watched her believe in it, not just practice it, right? It wasn't a checklist thing. It was something that she really believed. And so there was always somebody preaching on, there was always gospel music. So it was just like absorbing constantly. And in many ways, let's see, when I went to college is when I really had the opportunity to really exercise and explore my own understanding of faith. But I think because I had seen her in a variety of ways really believe a thing and live it and watch that belief then respond, so to speak, and manifest things that were important to her. So for me, believing that there is a God who is walking with me and walking alongside me and or guiding me, whose word never failed, who loves me unconditionally, and who will make sure that my needs are always met. Which doesn't mean that hard things won't happen, but that I will be okay even as I navigate those hard things, as I experience as a teenager, has really enabled me to take all of the leaps. So leaving my marriage, leaving the city and state where I grew up professionally and had a network of community, to move to New Orleans for a job right before a pandemic that we didn't know would happen. And then leaving that job to start seminary and to start a business with a month and a half of income in the bank. And I was just like, okay, I believe this is the thing I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to do it. And hopefully it doesn't blow up in my face. And it hasn't. But I think it was just being anchored in, I really believe that I'm not alone. And I believe that things are going to work out for my good. And I could not have imagined the way that things have worked out for my good. I just knew that I would be okay.
Yeah. That deep sense of knowing is certainly something that resonates with me a lot. It's a lot of the risks that I've taken. It's like a gut feeling. It's not something where I've laid out all the pros and cons. Of course, I'm thinking through things logically. I am a strategist. I'm an Aquarius, thinking about all the things. But at the end of the day, the decisions are they're here. They're like in my solar plexus. And whenever I have not followed that intuition, I have regretted it. I have never regretted following my intuition. And that just got affirmed for me again 2 weeks ago. And now, mind you, that following intuition does not trickle into every aspect of my life. But in business, maybe not my relationships, but in business, it's something that has been really reaffirmed and affirmed over and over again. And I think there's the foundation that we establish when we're younger. And then there are these things that continue to fortify it. And so that fortification of audacity for me and that bravery is because it works out, and then it works out, and then it works out, and then it works out. And when it doesn't work out, I'm like, that's why it didn't work out. And that's okay. Actually, it's like a redirection towards something else as well.
Yeah. And a reaffirmation of what you know, right? Like you can trust yourself, you can trust your inner knowing. I have a mentor here locally in Colorado who always says the knower knows. And I'm like, and I'm struggling, I can reground in that as well.
Yeah. Are there any sort of aspects of your leadership that are growing edges for you that you could maybe trace the echoes back to? Doesn't have to be your childhood, but just like earlier experiences that you've had that you're like, it's an area that I want to improve upon or explore its usefulness at this stage of my life. Like my workaholism is something where I was like, nope, leaving that in 2021. Yeah, curious if there's anything that stands out to you.
Yeah, I think what comes up immediately is I don't have a hard time having hard conversations, but they are not easy for me. I can be direct, but it's very uncomfortable. And that really directly connects to my people pleasing
Mhm.
experiences, which has followed me throughout my life journey, much to my own chagrin. And so I think that people pleasing tendency and that wanting to be liked can show up in and has shown up in my leadership and kind of shying away from difficult or hard or uncomfortable conversations or procrastinating making hard decisions or having hard conversations or just or direct conversations, right? It doesn't have to be hard, but it feels hard, it feels uncomfortable because you
Yeah,
might not like
yeah,
me. I don't know the result. I don't know what's gonna happen. And
yeah.
so it's taken a lot of work to personal work to work through that and be okay with
Mhm.
not being liked, being okay with a narrative that might be shaped about me, and trusting in what I know to be true about who I am and how I lead and how I show up in the world. And quite honestly, what helped a lot with that is having to having to leave my marriage and
Mhm.
release control around the narrative that he was trying to shape about who I was and everything. And so I often tell myself, like, okay, if I can do that, then I can do other hard things because that was a really hard
Yeah.
among many hard things I've had to do. So, yeah, that would be the thing that I think would be a growing edge and beneficial because life is hard and they're always going to be challenging and hard conversations to have. And so being able to resist that desire to people please and be liked, to really stand in the conviction of whatever truth that I'm holding in that moment, I think is always
Yeah.
a journey that I'm on.
Ooh, yeah. The people pleasing is so felt. I feel like all of us millennials grew up and ended up with it.
Yeah.
Everyone I know, I can save maybe a couple, are just like, I'm working on a codependency workbook right now. And it's what are your emotions showing up in this way? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Too many.
Exactly.
Leave me alone.
What else do you though? That's some hard work.
It is hard work. And so it's partially why I wanted to start this podcast and really exploring my own codependency and the way that it showed up in my co-ownership of my business and how I was like finding myself freezing and fawning, right,
Mhm.
with two different folks because the dynamic was repeating familial dynamics for me and being like, oh, that's why my body is taking over in this way, or that's why I'm unable to express my needs or advocate for a different direction because I'm reacting in this way. And that doesn't show up in all places and stages. Funny you were saying like folks tell you that you're brave and you don't see it in yourself. There are ways that folks perceive me as just very direct and which is all true, but not in every situation. And it's the ones that I think when you're out of them, you have an opportunity to reflect on and deconstruct when you get some distance. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that your divorce probably also allowed you that distance to deconstruct some of that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. All of
Yeah.
that.
As we come to wrap up, I'm curious if you could give any advice to maybe you as a younger leader or just leaders out there in general, a lesson that you've been chewing on for a while that you'd like to share with the people.
Yeah, trust your gut and grace abounds. Yeah, trust your gut. I think that has been the thing that I've been holding on to and sharing with others. I was at a training a couple weeks ago, and the person sitting next to me was vacillating between keeping her mask on or off. And she was like, I'm not really sure. And I was like, trust your gut. She was
Mhm.
like, and then she put the mask on because that's what she really wanted to do. But I think she was struggling with, again, showing up in a way that people expect. So I would say trust your gut and know that grace abounds. It exists and it's there, and we should revel in it a bit more.
No, I love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciated our conversation. That's it for this episode of Roots to Results. I really hope today's conversation was insightful and inspiring to folks who are listening. Thank you so much, Claire, for your vulnerability and your candor and sharing so many multidimensional parts of yourself. I really appreciate it. I think this was such a good reminder that leadership is more than just what we do at work. It is shaped by our stories and our experiences and all the challenges that we bring with us throughout our lives. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review and share it with all your friends. You can also follow us on social media to stay updated with new episodes and additional content. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and keep leading. Thank you so much.